Hello, welcome to lesson 42, Rules for Partial Methods in C Sharp, brought to you by Ankpro Technologies. My name is Harish. In this session, we are going to learn the partial methods and also we are going to learn the rules for creating the partial methods. Keep in mind, in the last session, we learned how to create a partial method. Right now, what we'll do is we'll learn the rules for creating the partial methods. Okay, first rule is partial method implementation is optional. If you don't provide the implementation, the compiler removes the signature and all calls to the method. Right now, to understand this, what we'll do is we'll jump into Visual Studio, and here we'll create partial classes and we'll do the demo. Okay, now what I'll do is, to this class I would like to add two partial classes. Like the class name is partial class 1. Okay, and I would like to add other file called partial class 2. Okay, this is what did I do is I just created two partial classes and I named as partial class 1 and partial class 2. And what I'll do is I'll just rename the class as sample partial class, and I'll come back here and I'll rename here also. I'll just remove this one and I'll name it as sample partial class. Okay, now what I'll do is I'll come back here, I'll come back to partial class 1 and I'll make this class as partial. I'll add partial keyword as well as public access modifier, and I'll come back here also, I'll make it as partial and I'll make it as public. Okay, now this works fine. Control A, Control KD. What I'll do is here I'll just remove the unwanted namespaces first, and in this class also. Okay, fine. Now we're jumping back into presentation. Here we learned that first rule is partial method implementation is optional, and if you don't provide the implementation, the compiler removes the signature and all calls to the method. To understand that very clearly, what we'll do is we'll jump into Visual Studio. Here in the partial class 1, what I'll do is I'll just create the partial method first. How to create the partial method? If you want to create a partial method, we have to make use of partial keyword. So I'll make use of partial keyword and return type is void, and the method name is sample method. Okay, this is the partial method definition. Keep in mind, I've not implemented, I just defined the method. Now what I'll do is I'll just create another normal method, public void, the method name is demo. Okay, and this method is going to print Ankpro Technologies. Okay, and now what I'll do is I'll go to my main program where I find the void main. Here I would like to call this partial class. The partial class name is sample partial class. And I'll come back here, I'll just copy and paste, and I'll create object of it, new. Okay, C dot, what I'll do is I'll just call that method demo, and what I'll do is in the partial class 1 I would like to call this partial method also. So what I'll do, I'll just call that partial method sample method. Okay, fine. Now coming to main program, what I'm doing is I'm just creating the instance of this partial class 1 and I'm calling that main method, that is demo method, in my main program. Now when I run this program, what actually happens is it will come to this method and it will print Ankpro Technologies, and now we are going to see whether this method is going to execute or not, because we are just only defined the method but we are not implemented. Now when I come here and when I run the program, you can observe whether it's going to print both Ankpro Technologies and also the method sample method on the console screen. Let's wait for that. No, it did not print, it just printed the Ankpro Technologies. But keep in mind, observe carefully, this sample method did not cause any error because the sample method is having only the definition but not the implementation. But when I build the project and when I run the program, it did not cause any error. It means that Partial method implementation is optional, and if you don't provide the implementation, the compiler removes the signature and all calls to the method. It means that when I run the program, it executed this part, but when it came to this method, it saw that this method is not having any implementation, so it just ignored this method and executed only Ankpro technologies on the console screen. This is the first rule to be remembered. Okay, coming back. Partial methods are private by default, and it is a compile time error to include any access modifier include private. It means that these partial methods are private by default, and if you try to add any access modifier like public, internal, other than that, and if you try to add private also, when I build this project, you can observe it's going to cause an error telling that a partial method cannot have access modifier. It means that partial method cannot only have access modifiers, it should not also have virtual, abstract, override, new, sealed and extend modifier keywords. Keep in mind, this is very important. Now I'll just remove this part. Okay, now we learned the second point, that is partial methods are private by default, and it is compile time error to include any access modifiers including private. And if we include declaration and implementation at the same time for a partial method, it gives a compile time error. To understand that very clearly, what we'll do is, now let us implement the sample method. How do I implement? Partial void sample method, and I would like to ask this method to print sample method, telling that sample method invoked. Okay, now when I build this project, build succeeded, we can observe here at the bottom, left bottom. Now when I run this program, it successfully prints Ankpro technologies and sample method invoked, because we have provided the implementation for the partial method. But keep in mind, the third point tells you that if we include declaration and implementation at the same time, it is going to give a compile time error. To understand that, what we'll do is, I'll just remove this declaration. Now when I run this program or build this project, it is telling that no defining declaration found for implementing declaration of partial method. It means that now you can't implement and you can't define and implement method at once. It means that you should not define the method and implement the method at once. First we have to define the method, then we have to implement. That is the meaning of this sentence. If we include declaration and implementation at the same time for a partial method, it gives a compile time error, and that's what we saw in demo. And coming to the fourth point, a partial method return type must be void, including any other return type. It is a compile time error. Now to understand that, here this method is going to return integer. Let's assume now when I run this program or build this program, it tells us that sample methods does not provides, okay, must have a void. You can observe at the last point, the partial methods must have a void return type. Partial method does not take any return type other than void. Now what I'll do is, instead of this, I'll just return a okay, I'll just declare some variable here. Okay, now it's okay. Now when I build this project, you can observe partial methods must have a void return type. Now it does not take any other return type other than void. That's why it's throwing us error telling that partial methods takes only the void return type. Other than that, it just ignores and provides you a compile time error. And that's what we saw now. Okay, now this works fine. The partial method return type must be void, including any other return type is a compile time error. Keep in mind. Signature of partial method declaration must match the signature of the implementation. It means that here is the definition for the sample method, that is partial method, and here is the implementation. If this signature of the definition of this partial method if it is not matching with the implementation, then it causes error. For example, let us pass a variable here. Now when I try to build this project, it tells us that no defining declaration found for implementing declaration of partial method. Means it treating this as separate definition and this as separate implementation. It means the partial method declaration and definition must have the same signature always. You can observe here, this is the definition and this is the implementation. Both are having the same signature in the sense the return type and the method name should be same, and the access modifiers. Okay. And the partial method must be declared within a partial class or a partial struct. A non-partial class or struct cannot have partial method. It means that whatever the methods we are going to define, the partial methods should be declared within this partial class itself. If I remove this partial keyword, it causes you an error telling that when I build this project, it tells us that missing partial modifier on declaration type. It means that you can't define the partial methods in a normal class. You can define only them in the partial class itself. Not only not only about the class, for struct also. If you're going to define the struct partial method inside a struct, and that struct should be have a partial keyword. Okay, that's the meaning of this sentence. Implementing partial method more than once raises a compile time error. To understand it very clearly, what I'll do is I'll just copy this method and I'll come to partial class 2 and I'll paste here and I'll invoke second time. Now when I come to main program and when I run this, you can observe partial method may not have multiple implementing declarations. It means that you can observe here I'm having one method definition here, sample method, but I'm trying to implement it two times. Once here in this main class, in the class 1, and in the class 2 I'm trying to implement the same method, and that is trying to cause us error telling that partial method may not have multiple implementation. That's what the meaning of this sentence. Implementing partial method more than once raises a compile time error. This what about the rules of creating a partial methods. Thank you for listening. Have a great day. Please subscribe to Ankpro training below.